When a man like Steven Spielberg speaks of the films that shaped him, it feels less like nostalgia and more like watching a lifetime quietly unfold in the dark. Born in 1946, Spielberg came of age when cinema still breathed through film reels and flickering light. His journey, uncertain, relentless, deeply human, made him the storyteller generations grew up trusting. So when Spielberg, now 78, names the 6 movies that formed him, he isn't offering a list, he's revealing a legacy. Number 1. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. Spielberg has often said there are moments in a young person's life that do more than inspire, they rearrange the world inside you. For him, that awakening came at 16, when he stepped into a theater and watched Lawrence of Arabia unfold across the screen. He didn't know it then, but the desert, vast, wordless, eternal, would leave a deeper imprint on him than almost anything he'd see again. Like many of us who remember the first time a film felt larger than the room we sat in, Spielberg walked out changed. Not entertained, but transformed. He admired the film long before he understood it. David Lean's sense of scale, the way he let silence speak, the way a single horizon could hold an entire life, these were choices that reached Spielberg at a level beyond craft. They stirred something in him that older viewers know well. That rare recognition that art isn't just made, it's surrendered to. He respected Lean's discipline, his patience, his refusal to hurry an image. In an age of spectacle, Lean trusted stillness, trusted the moment, trusted the audience. Spielberg absorbed that lesson like scripture, but the impact went far deeper than technique. Lawrence of Arabia taught Spielberg how to see. It reshaped the rhythm of his imagination, the way he framed a face, the way he lingered on a landscape, the way he balanced beauty with the quiet ache of human contradiction. The film's central figure, T.E. Lawrence, wasn't heroic in any ordinary sense. He was flawed, fragile, magnificent, unraveling. Spielberg recognized something essential there. That great stories aren't about triumph, but about transformation. That a man can be both extraordinary and undone. It was a truth he carried into Saving Private Ryan, Munich, War Horse, and even the intimate corners of Schindler's List. For Spielberg, Lawrence of Arabia wasn't merely influential, it became a lifelong companion, a kind of artistic compass. Over the decades, he revisited it not to study, but to listen. To be reminded of the power of restraint, the gravity of silence, the poetry of a frame held just a moment longer than expected. And if you grew up in an era when films were experiences rather than algorithms, you understand why a work like Lean's stays with a person forever. It settles in the memory the way old music does, quietly, faithfully, shaping you long after the final note fades. To this day, Spielberg calls Lawrence of Arabia his desert island movie, the one film that still teaches him something new each time the sun rises across that endless sand. Number 2, 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. There are films we understand, and films we simply endure and wonder. For Spielberg, 2001. A Space Odyssey belonged to that rare second category, an experience he once admitted left him speechless, not because he grasped every meaning, but because he didn't. Many of us who saw Kubrick's masterpiece during its early years will remember that strange mixture of awe and uncertainty, the darkness of the theater, the humming silence of space, the slow ballet of machines moving with almost human grace. It wasn't storytelling in the usual sense. It was something colder, deeper, and strangely intimate. Spielberg discovered 2001 as a young man hungry for answers about how cinema worked. Instead, Kubrick handed him questions vast, cosmic, and unapologetically unresolved. Spielberg respected that immensely. Kubrick didn't guide, he provoked. Where other directors explained, Kubrick trusted the viewer to wander. That refusal to simplify felt almost spiritual to Spielberg. He often spoke with admiration about the film's long silences, its deliberate pacing, its willingness to let mystery remain mystery. For a generation raised on spectacle and clarity, Kubrick encouraged discomfort, and Spielberg bowed to that courage. The respect went beyond philosophy. Spielberg admired the precision, the way the camera drifted as if weightless, the way light carved out solitude in a world of metal and emptiness, the way every movement felt closer to choreography than direction. Kubrick, he would later say, taught him that cinema doesn't need to explain itself. It only needs to be true to itself. That lesson stayed with him, just as it stayed with viewers who recall the quiet rattle of theater seats during those long, contemplative shots, when not a word was spoken, but everything was said. And the impact? It followed Spielberg like an orbiting star. You can feel 2001 echo in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where wonder and fear share the same breath. You sense it in Minority Report, with its sleek, sterile landscapes and uneasy futurism. Most directly, you see it in AI, artificial intelligence, a project Kubrick entrusted to Spielberg before his death, a gesture of respect between two artists who recognized each other's devotion to the unknown. Spielberg never tried to imitate Kubrick's distance or severity. Instead, he allowed Kubrick's influence to sharpen his own instincts, to stretch the emotional resonance of his images, and to remind him that not all stories need certainty, some need space. For Spielberg, 2001 became a film he returned to not for comfort, but for humility, a reminder that the universe is vast, art is boundless, and even a master must remain a student of wonder. Number 3. A Guy Named Joe, 1943. Long before Steven Spielberg created worlds filled with dinosaurs, extraterrestrials, and war-torn landscapes, his imagination was shaped by a film far gentler and far more intimate. A Guy Named Joe entered his life not in a grand theater, but on a small television set glowing in the quiet of his childhood home. Spielberg was still a boy then, too young to articulate what he felt, yet old enough to recognize the rare ache that comes from a story touching someplace tender. For many who grew up in that era, television wasn't just entertainment, it was a window to wonder, and Spielberg, wide-eyed and curious, felt this film reach him with a force he would later describe as a thunderbolt. What struck him wasn't spectacle, but sincerity. Spencer Tracy's portrayal of a reckless pilot who dies in service, only to return as a guiding spirit, carried a gentle wisdom about love, duty, and the unfinished business of the human heart. Spielberg respected that softness, the film's willingness to mix grief with hope, sacrifice with redemption, and the supernatural with the beautifully ordinary. It was, in many ways, a film beyond genre, free of modern irony, shaped instead by an earnest belief in goodness. That was the quality Spielberg admired most, a heartfelt simplicity unafraid of emotion. If you remember the kinds of movies that played on Sunday afternoons, where lessons were quiet and endings mattered, you'll understand exactly what he saw. But the impact of A Guy Named Joe stayed with Spielberg far longer than childhood. It taught him that stories could comfort as much as they could thrill, that the invisible threads between people could be as dramatic as any battlefield. This influence is woven gently through E.T., The Color Purple, War Horse, and even The Fabelmans, films where love carries weight, where loss echoes softly, and where the supernatural, when it appears, exists only to illuminate the human spirit. Decades later, Spielberg paid tribute in the most personal way an artist can. He remade it. Always 1989 wasn't an attempt to outshine the original, but a thank you, a love letter from the grown man to the boy who once sat enchanted before a flickering screen. Critics were lukewarm, but Spielberg never minded. The film wasn't crafted for them. It was crafted for memory, for gratitude, for the child who learned, through a story about a pilot's second chance, that cinema can heal, comfort, and whisper truths too fragile for everyday conversation. For Spielberg, A Guy Named Joe was not just influence, it was initiation. A gentle reminder that even the greatest directors begin as dreamers, moved by stories that ask nothing more than to be felt. Number 4, Fantasia, 1940. Long before Steven Spielberg understood plot or character, before he could name a camera angle or imagine a film set, he understood wonder, and nothing awakened that wonder quite like Fantasia. He first encountered it, as many children of the 1950 seconds did, not as a film to be analyzed, but as a dream to be absorbed. Fantasia didn't follow rules, and it didn't ask permission. It simply unfolded like a hallucination of sound and color. For a young Spielberg, whose imagination was already stretching farther than words could reach, it was the first time a movie didn't feel watched, it felt experienced. What he respected most was the purity of Disney's vision. Here was a film that dared to trust music alone, classical compositions guiding hand-drawn worlds with no dialogue, no exposition, no conventional storytelling. Spielberg admired that bravery. Walt Disney had created something unapologetically artistic, a work that didn't seek understanding, only feeling. For anyone who grew up in the era of vinyl, crackle, and concert halls, you know that music was once more than background. It was a world to inhabit. Spielberg recognized that same world inside Fantasia. He respected the film's rhythm, its confidence in silence, in crescendos, in gentle pauses between spectacle. Even as a child, he sensed that the animation wasn't illustrating the music, it was dancing with it. That union of sound and image planted a seed deep within him, a lesson he would later revisit with the humility of someone still learning. To Spielberg, Fantasia proved that cinema didn't have to explain itself to be meaningful. It only had to move you. The impact of this early encounter is woven quietly through his work. You can hear it in the rising musical phrases of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where a five-note melody becomes a language between species. You can feel it in E.T., where John Williams' score lifts a child and an alien across the moonlit sky. You sense it in the orchestral sweep of Hook, in the emotional textures of the BFG. In every moment, Spielberg lets music guide the soul rather than merely accompany the image. He once said that Fantasia taught him that story isn't always what characters say, it's what the music feels. And for anyone who remembers the days when a soundtrack album could hold a piece of your heart, that truth rings deeply familiar. To Spielberg, Fantasia wasn't a blueprint, it was an awakening, a reminder that art can be boundless, that imagination can be wordless, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are carried not by characters, but by the symphonies that shape them. Number 5. The Godfather, 1972. By the early 1972s, Steven Spielberg was no longer a boy dreaming in darkened theaters. He was a young director standing on the edge of his own future. And when The Godfather arrived, it struck him with the force of revelation. Many who lived through that era will remember the feeling, the quiet theater, the heavy shadows, the sense that this wasn't just a film, it was a shift in the cultural weather. For Spielberg, that shift was personal. He once admitted that after walking out of The Godfather, he thought to himself, almost with disbelief, "I'll never be that good." He respected Francis Ford Coppola not simply for the film's craft, but for its restraint, the calm patience with which scenes unfolded, the stillness between words, the way moral decay crept in, not through violence, but through silence. Coppola trusted the audience's maturity. He trusted that people who had lived, who had loved, who had lost, would understand what wasn't spoken. Spielberg admired that profoundly. Many filmmakers chase emotion. Coppola allowed it to bloom. Many chase power. Coppola revealed its corrosion. In an age crowded with noise, The Godfather dared to whisper. What Spielberg respected most was the film's honesty. There was no glamour in its violence, no celebration in its tragedy. It carried the weight of real consequence, something older audiences recognize instinctively because life has taught them that choices echo far past their intentions. Spielberg responded to that truth with reverence. He saw in The Godfather a masterclass in control, in tone, in the subtle dignity of holding back. The impact on Spielberg's own work would become unmistakable, though never imitative. He absorbed the film's lessons quietly, letting them settle into the deeper muscles of his storytelling. You can feel The Godfather's influence in the somber shadows of Munich, where vengeance grows tangled with regret. You sense it in the moral unraveling portrayed in Schindler's List, framed through a lens of quiet dread rather than spectacle. Even in films like Catch Me If You Can, the echoes are there, the idea that power, family, identity, and longing can occupy the same fragile space. For Spielberg, The Godfather served as both a benchmark and a beacon. It humbled him and inspired him in equal measure. It reminded him that cinema, at its highest form, is not about the scale of the world it creates, but the truth of the world it reveals. Many viewers felt the same in 1972, that this was not merely a crime saga, but a meditation on the human condition, delivered with a depth that lingers long after the final frame. To Spielberg, The Godfather was a master's hand at work, one that quietly shaped his own. Number 6. It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. Of all the films Steven Spielberg has carried with him through the decades, none rests closer to his heart than It's a Wonderful Life. He discovered it the way many from his generation did, quietly, unexpectedly, on a night when television seemed to glow a little warmer. He wasn't yet the Spielberg the world would come to know. He was simply a young man searching for meaning, grappling with the ordinary uncertainties of youth. And in George Bailey, flawed, weary, bursting with hidden goodness, Spielberg found a reflection of something profoundly human. Those who grew up in the mid-century era will remember the power that film once held, the way it seemed to speak gently to the doubts we carried but seldom confessed. Spielberg respected Frank Capra for his courage, not the bold, cinematic courage of sweeping epics, but the quiet courage to tell the truth about ordinary lives. Capra understood the fragile weight of responsibility, the invisible sacrifices made behind closed doors, the way hope can dissolve and return in the same breath. Spielberg admired the film's honesty, the way it refused to decorate life with fantasy, yet still managed to find miracle in the everyday. For a generation that lived through shifting decades, through triumphs and trials, Capra's vision felt familiar. It reminded viewers of the small acts of grace that hold a family, a community, a life together. But the impact of It's a Wonderful Life reached Spielberg at a deeper level than admiration. It shaped the emotional framework of his storytelling. The longing for connection that runs through E.T. echoes Bailey's yearning to matter. The fragile bonds of family in Catch Me If You Can mirror Capra's belief that love, when stretched, still holds. Even The Fabelmans, Spielberg's most personal work, carries the faint glow of Bedford Falls, ordinary people caught between heartbreak and hope. The film also taught him a truth that only time can verify. That sentiment is not weakness, and tenderness is not naive. Spielberg never apologized for the warmth in his movies, because Capra showed him that feeling deeply is a form of courage. Viewers who remember watching It's a Wonderful Life each holiday season will understand why it endures. Its message does not age. It matures with us. It becomes more truthful the longer we live. For Spielberg, the film is not merely a favorite, it is the one he has called perfect. The film that did not just inspire him to tell stories, but convinced him that stories matter, that a single life, lived honestly, is miracle enough. Listening to Spielberg's 6 choices, you realize he isn't honoring films, he's honoring the moments that shaped him, the teachers who never knew his name, and the emotional compass that guided his life's work. At 78, Spielberg still directs with the same quiet hope these films gave him, because the stories that raise us never truly fade, they simply deepen as we do. Spielberg's list reflects not a career of spectacle, but a lifetime of searching for meaning, proof that even the greatest storytellers begin as audiences moved by light, sound, and truth. Every time I go back to the movies that shaped me, I'm reminded why I picked up a camera in the first place: to feel something real.